So now we're going to talk about grid-ins. Your approach to grid-ins is a little different than it is to the multiple choice. There are no answer choices, obviously. That's why it's called a grid-in. You must solve the question, write your answer on a grid, and bubble it in. It's only going to be in one section, and there's only, I think, 10 of them. And the order of difficulty will still apply. The first 3 or 4 will be easy, the middle will be medium, and then the last 3 or 4 will be hard. Take your time on the easy and medium questions as always. That's always the strategy. You don't want to rush through those just to get to the hard ones, which you're more likely to miss. Some tips for grid-in happiness: don't bother to reduce fractions. 3/6 is as good as 1/2. You don't have to reduce the fractions before you grid them. Don't round off your decimals. If your answer has more than 4 digits, just start to the left of the decimal point and fit in as many as you can. You don't have to round. You can do what we call truncate, which means you just chop it off. Don't grid in mixed fractions. And the reason is because if you want to grid in 4 1/4, you can't grid it in because it looks like 41/4. So if it's a mixed fraction, you either need to make it a decimal, so like 4.25, or an improper fraction, 17/4. If the question asks for one possible value, any answer that works is okay. So once you get an answer that works, stop. You don't have to keep going. Forget about negatives, variables, pi, dollar signs, percent signs. You can't grid them. So if you get a negative or an answer that has a variable in it or something, you've done something wrong. And you can still use the plugging in strategy if the question has an implied variable. Okay, you want to be sure that if you've taken the time to work one of these, that you bubble in your answer, because you obviously thought that it was worth time that you could have spent on a different question, and so you're not going to get counted off if you miss these. Okay, the multiple choice you are, but the grid-ins, they don't count off if you miss them. So go ahead and bubble in an answer if you get one, because it's not going to hurt you if you got it wrong.
So no matter, like, if you just answer it?
Yeah, if you just put something in there. If you just have like a hunch, oh, I think this one's 2. You can just put it 2.
It doesn't have to be remotely right.
Well, they're not going to count it right, but they're also not going to count it wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, you won't get the points for being right, but you won't get docked either.
Okay.
Okay, so take a few minutes to do these 3 grid-ins, and then we'll go over them, and we'll talk a little bit about just some strategies for Saturday, and then we'll be through.
What are you doing?
Okay, so we'll go ahead and go over these. The first one relates to geometry, triangles. The angles of a triangle have to total up to 180. So we know that this little square means that this one's 90. So 90 plus 2x plus x has to equal 180. So we've got 90 plus 3x equals 180. So then if you subtract 90 from both sides, we've got 3x equals 90. So x would be 30. When you grid this in, it doesn't matter if you start on the left or the right or you put it in the middle, just grid in a 30 somewhere. So you can grid it in anywhere that you want. You could put 30.0 if you want to, you don't have to, but you would just grid in at 30. Okay, the chart above shows Orwell's projected expenditures for his freshman year at River State University. If he plans to spend a total of $10,000 for the year, how many dollars will he spend on books? Okay, so when you look up here, it's X%. So we've got to figure out what X is before we can figure out the amount that it would be out of the $10,000. So if you look, you've got 22 plus 16 plus 28. So those are the percents that you know. And then you've got 2 pieces of the pie that are both X. So you've got 2X. And those have to total up to 100%. So if we add these up, this is going to be 66, I think, right? 66 plus 2x would be 100. So 2x would be 34. So x would be 17. Now, don't stop there though and bubble in 17, because remember, it's not asking you what x is, it's asking you how many dollars will he spend on books. Well, he's going to spend 17% of 10,000. So to figure out a percent, remember it's 17% means out of 100. So 17% of means to multiply 10,000. So you would do 17 over 100 times 10,000. And 17 over 100 times 10,000 is 1,700. So you would bubble in 1,700. 1700. So that one's medium because it's multiple steps. You have to figure out x first, which means you have to know that these add up to 100. And then once you find x, you have to know how to find a percent. So you have to take a percent of 10,000. At a certain university, the ratio of science majors to art majors was 3:1. So that means that there are 3 times as many science majors as art majors. So, all right, the ratio of 3:1 means that we have 3 times as many science majors as we do art majors. 600 other students changed their majors to science and art in a ratio of 1:2. So that part I was doing correct. If there's 600 and the ratio that they're going to change their majors to science and art is 1:2, you're still going to add those up, divide into 600, and then multiply each of those by that. So that means 200 people are going to change their major to science, 400 are going to change their major to art, and so the new ratio of science to art will be 4:3. Okay, so originally the ratio of science to art was 3:1. And now we're adding 200 students to science and 400 students to art to create a new ratio of 4:3. What we're trying to figure out is how many originally were art majors. We can't solve this if we have 2 variables. So that's where this is going to come into play. We know originally that the science majors were 3 times the art majors. So we can plug in 3A down here for S and make this equation just about A's instead of A's and S's. And so now if you cross multiply, you can solve this. This is a proportion. So if I cross multiply, I'm going to get 9A plus 600, 3 times 3A and 3 times 200, equals 4A plus 1,600. And then you can solve for A. Whoops, minus 4. So 5A plus 600 equals 1,600. And then subtract 600 from both sides. That's not at all what I did before. Oh, yeah, subtracted wrong. So 5A equals 1,000. So A would be 200. There were originally 200 art majors and 600 science majors. So you can go back up here and plug in and make sure that this works. So we're saying originally there were 200 art majors, which would mean that there were originally 600 science majors. That is a ratio of 3:1. And then if you add 400 to the art majors and 200 to the science majors, you do get a ratio of 4:3, 8:6, so 4:3. So that does work out. So the answer would be 200. 200. Very hard.
This one would have been a skip.
Yeah, that would be a skip. I would definitely say that would be one if the rest of it just was a ridiculously easy test and I had a lot of time to figure that one out. But you can work that one. Okay. So real quick, let's just talk about some strategies for Saturday. Okay. So make sure that on the night before the test, you gather up everything that you'll need. That includes your admission ticket, a valid form of photo identification, several number 2 pencils, a calculator if you need to borrow one. You can borrow one on Friday. With fresh batteries, I'll give you some batteries.
Can we
a
use
watch
those?
and a high energy snack. Yeah.
Yes.
Don't cram, okay? You have until Friday to study and stuff, but Friday night, don't try to cram. Don't try to go online and watch all the videos from the class. You've worked hard. The best thing that you should do that you do before is get a good night's sleep. You've covered the content and you've perfected your skills, hopefully by then. So it's time to get in test mode, which is calm, rested, confident, and ready. Dress in layers. The climate and test centers can vary from sauna-like to frigid, so you want to be prepared for both extremes. Everybody knows that if you're uncomfortable, you have trouble concentrating, so be sure that you dress in layers. So if you get too hot, you can take some off. If you get too cold, you can add some. Arrive early, and nothing stresses people out more than to worry about whether or not they're going to get there in time. So if you've never been to the place where you're testing, you might want to drive by there before the test day so that you're not having to worry about that. Don't spend too much time on one question. That last one was a good example of one that I ended up spending way too much time on. Each question is worth the same number of points. So harder questions aren't worth more. They're worth the same as easy. If a question's confusing or too time consuming, don't lose your cool. Move on to something that will give you more confidence that you'll feel better about. You can always come back to hard questions if you have time. Don't try to figure out which section is the experimental section. On the SAT, there is going to be one section that is not going to count towards your score. Don't try to figure out what it is so that you can blow it off. You won't be able to tell. Just do your best on all the sections. The ACT, if you're taking that ever, it does have experimental questions. Sometimes they're scattered throughout, so you just need to do your best on every question. Keep track of where you are in a section, because remember, that's going to guide your guessing, and it's going to guide your opinion about how easily the problem should work out. If it's an obvious answer early in the set, that might be right, but later on, there's often booby traps. I like that they put booby traps. Guess aggressively. Okay, don't get too cautious with your guessing. If you don't know an answer, that doesn't mean that you just automatically need to leave the question blank. And definitely don't guess randomly. Eliminate answer choices that you know are wrong, and then make an educated guess. If you can eliminate even one answer choice, it pays to guess. So keep that in mind. If you ever take the ACT, you're not penalized for guessing, so on the ACT you should answer every question. Before filling in the answer grid, make sure that you're filling in answers next to the right numbers. I made that mistake once on the SAT and didn't realize it till time was almost up. I was off on my numbers, and I had gotten off pretty far back. So make sure every time you fill in an answer that you check the number that you're filling in. And be sure to relax. Your attitude and outlook are crucial to your testing performance, so be confident. And that'll make a big impact on how you do. So,
What did you get on your SAT?
well, this is back whenever it was out of a 1,600, not out of a 2,400, but I had a 1,400.
Ooh.
Bishop of Reeds had a perfect score.
Yeah,
on the
perfect.
SAT. Yeah.
Freaking nerd.
Yeah, he was
Nerd.
Yeah.